Hello, hello. Howie Gearhauser here with my dad, Dr. G. In today's video episode, we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into melatonin. Now, we talk about melatonin a lot as it being really important for sleep, for mitochondrial repair and mitochondrial function, and a long list of other important benefits and needs for this melatonin, right? But there is a big difference between natural melatonin that we're accumulating from nature and supplemental melatonin, where we're just taking a pill to bypass doing the natural things. So there's some research indicating that the supplemental melatonin isn't exactly the same as the natural melatonin. So we wanted to decipher the difference for you guys, because millions of Americans are taking supplemental melatonin because they know it's important. But is it really the same thing? We're calling it the same thing, but is it really the same thing going on within your body? So Dad, can you give us a little more background on this topic?
Yes, well, as you mentioned, there's millions of people taking melatonin. And I know it sounds like a good idea because melatonin is such an important molecule. It's a free radical scavenger, so it's something that protects the inside of our cells and the inside of our mitochondria. It orchestrates the repair of the cell and the mitochondria. Of course, it's the sleep hormone, and sleep is critically important. If melatonin is low, you don't sleep as well. They're using melatonin experimentally, supplementing it for treating cancers and other diseases. They've used supplemental melatonin to treat jet lag and sleep disorders like insomnia. Can't sleep? Well, try a melatonin. So now millions of people take it. But you have to look at the whole picture, the whole biochemistry, the whole quantum electrodynamic processes that are going on. And if you take something like melatonin, that's so critically important, but your body, makes a very specific amount. And so the problems are, it's been shown that if you are taking supplemental melatonin and your eyes are exposed to bright light, it can damage the photoreceptors in the eye. And, damaging your retina is not a good idea. And that is kind of a risk that I wouldn't take unless you're under the supervision of a physician that's checking your melatonin levels and really knows what they're doing. Because if they don't, just going out because you're not sleeping well and taking melatonin might not be a good idea because of what I just mentioned. Plus the things that melatonin could possibly do if your level is too high or if melatonin is exposed to light. Like I said, when it is, it damages your photoreceptors. And then another study, and there's been several studies that show this, and there's some that show that it doesn't happen, but what happens in some of the studies with taking supplemental melatonin is that the blood sugar goes up. And another thing that goes up is insulin resistance. So in other words, it's making you diabetic or pre-diabetic, taking melatonin. So I always tell people, melatonin to do every day for the rest of your life just because it does all these wonderful things in your body, when the research shows that, hey, it might do some bad things, because everything in nature has two sides to it. It's like, the sword has two sharp edges. And so supplementing something that we don't have a great handle on, exactly what it does, and when our body really keeps a close tab on how much is made, and that production of melatonin depends on stimulus from our environment. So what we tell our health coaching clients to do is do the things that we know help your melatonin. And one of those is getting ultraviolet light in your eye every day. So ultraviolet light activates the precursor amino acid that becomes melatonin. Um, so it's tryptophan, and then serotonin is the neurotransmitter, are both precursors to melatonin. So getting the ultraviolet light in your eye. So we talk a lot about not wearing sunglasses, going outside. We're not saying to do hours and hours of it at first, but if you think about our ancestors, they were in the sun all day, every day. That's how, life is meant to be. That's how life was for humans for millions of years. But recently, the Matrix has come in and told us, hey, we're not good unless we, take a supplement.
Yeah, and another thing that's really important too, in combination with getting the UV light, is making sure that you're blocking artificial light, specifically the blue and green spectrums at night. So you can wear the blue blocking glasses. We have a video on that. We have a whole video on how to block artificial light, so go check that out. I'm not going to dive too much into that right now. But that's really important too, to make sure you're actually secreting melatonin. So even if you've built up your melatonin stores, if it's not secreting because your brain doesn't know it's time to secrete it, that can also be part of the problem. So it's not always low melatonin. Sometimes it's you're not secreting melatonin properly. Is there anything you want to add to that point?
No, we think of melatonin being made in the pineal gland, and it is, but melatonin is also made in our mitochondria. Remember, our mitochondria are little engines inside our cells, and they really need the melatonin to protect them. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's a very powerful free radical scavenger. So those free radicals that are produced when we make energy, they do have an important purpose. Like everything in nature, there's a balance. So free radicals signal, they're a signaling system, but they also damage things if they go above where they need to be. And that's what melatonin does, is it keeps the free radicals at the signaling level, but not letting them go too high to where they start creating the internal damage. And the internal damage to our mitochondria is really what leads to most of the modern diseases that we don't want to get, like heart attacks and cancer and neurodegenerative diseases and autoimmune diseases and obesity and depression. All these things have been correlated to dysfunction in the mitochondria, which will be accelerated if we don't have the right amount of our natural levels of melatonin. Again, if we take it, we don't know the timing of that. I mean, it could be that there are some instances where melatonin could be helpful as a supplement. So I'm not saying, never supplement it, but, have your levels checked, get a doctor on board that's been doing it for a while, so they have that pattern recognition of, all my patients aren't getting eye damage, or all my patients aren't becoming diabetic.
Yeah, one other thing before we sign off about the UV light exposure, take that slow. You don't want to go out and overexpose yourself to UV light and get burnt. The other thing too, make sure you're incorporating morning sun exposure too, specifically at sunrise, because the light spectrum that penetrates the atmosphere at sunrise will actually charge up your skin to be able to tolerate more UV light later on in the day. So you don't want to do UV light without that morning sunlight, otherwise you increase your chance of having skin damage, which we don't want. So charge up your skin with the morning sunlight, the sunrise sunlight, and then you'll be able to tolerate more UV light without getting burnt. Cool? Anything else before we sign off, Dad?
Yeah, and that's the same thing with the eye. So the eye does the same thing. So you see that morning sunlight that has a lot of red and orange, and the red and orange regenerates the cells in your retina, just like it does in your skin. So seeing the sunrise will allow you to let more UV light into your eyes later in the day. So UVA comes out first, and then UVB comes out later in the day. In the winter, a lot of places don't get UVB because the angle of the sun doesn't become direct enough. So getting the UV light is what stimulates our ability to make melatonin. So if you don't do that, you know, theoretically, you could take a pill. And, you know, I'm not saying never do that, but I'm saying be cautious.
Cool. So hopefully this information was helpful in terms of, you know, whether or not you want to keep taking the melatonin supplement. I definitely think you got to incorporate the UV light on your skin and in your eyes, but take it slow. And then maybe you don't need the supplement. We find that time and time again. You start doing it the natural way and not the man-made way, things tend to check out. So we will see you guys on the next video. We appreciate you tuning in. Thanks, Dad.
Okay.